Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome.
In our top story, the Israeli ground invasion to root out the Hamas terror group in Gaza has begun. Just weeks after enduring the horrific massacre of 1,400 people and the abduction of more than 240 hostages, the IDF has started its advance on the northern Gaza Strip. The IDF dropped leaflets urging the residents of Gaza City to evacuate to the south immediately and declared that the Hamas stronghold has become a battlefield. The Iranian-backed terror group continues to fire hundreds of rockets into Israeli communities while holding hundreds of hostages in Gaza. One Hamas prisoner was rescued by IDF ground troops last week. Yochanan has more on that story.
Yes, Rebecca, the Israeli Defense Forces and the Shin Bet Security Service announced that the IDF troops rescued a hostage who was being held by Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Private Ori Megidish was taken from the Nahal Oz base in southern Israel on October 7th and was held captive in the Gaza Strip for 3 weeks. The IDF is not releasing any details regarding her rescue, but it did disclose that Megidish was able to provide valuable intelligence that could be used for future rescue missions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to the families of the remaining captives, saying the Jewish state will exhaust every possibility to free the hostages and bring them home.
Israel's finance ministry has moved to sanction the Palestinian Authority over its support of the Hamas terror group. Bezalel Smotrich instructed his ministry to halt the transfer of all funds to the PA in light of senior PA official support for the horrific massacres of the Nazi terrorist organization Hamas. He said that the PA funds activities against the state of Israel and its citizens, and that once again the Palestinian Authority has proven it is a terror-supporting organization.
Jerusalem is facing enormous pressure to increase the flow of aid into Gaza, despite the likelihood that Hamas terrorists will hijack the supplies and use them against the Jewish state. U.S. President Joe Biden reportedly called on Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu to immediately and significantly increase the flow of humanitarian aid into the terror enclave, a sentiment which was echoed by the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court at The Hague and the UN Secretary General. Hundreds of tons of supplies have already been transferred to Gaza, but the United Nations Relief and Works Agency has been unable to control the distribution of the aid. UNRWA food warehouses have been overrun and completely ransacked, leaving many civilians without necessary supplies. Hamas has confiscated civilian and hospital fuel supplies, which it is using to power its rocket launchers and the intricate network of some 300 miles of terror tunnels that it has constructed underneath Gaza.
The Israeli Defense Forces has revealed that Hamas militants have taken over several hospitals in Gaza and is using them as command centers for its war against Israel. The Iranian-backed terror group continues to fire dozens of rockets into Israeli communities while hiding behind the civilian population in Gaza. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said Hamas has turned hospitals into command and control centers and hideouts for terrorists and commanders. He said Hamas's use of hospitals is systematic. They do so precisely because they know Israel distinguishes between terrorists and civilians.
Kataib Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy army operating in Iraq, claims it attacked a U.S. Army base in the region. The group boasted that it sent 2 suicide drones to attack the Ain al-Assad military compound in northern Iraq. Security forces have confirmed that 4 Katyusha rockets were fired on the facility. A senior U.S. defense official told the Times of Israel that U.S. and coalition forces in the region have been attacked with drones and rockets more than 24 times in the last 2 weeks.
Newly elected Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives Mike Johnson says that his first order of business is approving an aid package for the Jewish state. Johnson said our nation's greatest ally in the Middle East is under attack, so the first bill brought to the floor will be in support of America's dear friend Israel. He said we are going to show Israel and the entire world that the barbarism of Hamas is wretched and wrong.
A new report reveals a startling rise in global anti-Semitic attacks. The study released by the World Zionist Organization, the Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism Ministry, and the Jewish Agency reflects a 500% spike in anti-Semitic attacks around the world. It notes repeated calls from ISIS to target Jews in the United States and Europe. Radical groups around the world have adopted this hateful ideology and are threatening Jewish communities and calling for the annihilation of the Jewish state. Pro-Palestinian protests are raging on university campuses across America. Jewish students and clubs are being targeted. The report states that 25% of Jewish students have experienced hate-driven activities and acts of violence on their campuses.
An anonymous terror threat prompted the evacuation of dozens of Jewish schools throughout Paris last week. The threats warned that bombs would blow up 20 different schools throughout the French capital. Many Jewish institutions around the globe have been shuttered, and security has been increased for fear of anti-Semitic attacks by violent pro-Palestinian groups.
Turkish President Tayyip Recep Erdogan has come under fire for supporting Hamas. Erdogan has hosted major pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas rallies since the onset of the war on Israel. He recently called the Iranian-backed terror organization a liberation group whose freedom fighters were waging a battle to protect their lands and people. Members of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus in the United States government penned a letter to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken insisting the Biden administration hold the Turkish government accountable for supporting the Iranian-backed terror group. The letter says, "We urge the United States government to employ the full spectrum of its diplomatic and national security tools to sever any political, logistical, and financial links between Turkey and Hamas that enable Hamas to commit atrocious acts of terrorism against Israel."
The United Nations has passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, without mentioning the massacre of more than 1,400 people on October 7th, or the more than 240 hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, wore a yellow star that said "never again," while he berated the Security Council for its silence. Erdan said when Jewish babies were burned in Auschwitz, the world was silent, and today, when Jewish babies were burned in southern Israel by the Nazi Hamas, the world is silent again. Erdan said that the passage of this biased anti-Israel resolution proves the UN no longer holds even 1 ounce of legitimacy or relevance.
Angry mobs of Russians in the Republic of Dagestan stormed an airport to attack a flight of Israelis. When the incoming aircraft from Tel Aviv landed, bloodthirsty rioters shouting "Death to the Jews" flooded the tarmac. Israelis were locked down in the plane until Russian security forces could contain the situation. The violent protesters reportedly stopped cars, checking to see if any of the passengers were Jewish, and even went room to room in a hotel frequented by Israelis to check if any Jews were hiding there. One terrorist was reported as saying, "We are here for the Jews. We came to kill them with knives and shoot them."
The city of Jerusalem has inaugurated its Lights of Hope installation as a symbol of solidarity with the hostages in Gaza. Pais Arena Square has turned into a vigil for the kidnapped, with light bulbs and pictures of each of the captives, while floodlights around the installation illuminate the Jerusalem skyline as a beacon of hope for those who were kidnapped by Hamas. Uri Menachem, CEO of the Ariel company, which collaborated on the Lights of Hope exhibit, said that the project conveys a message to the world to unite around the effort to bring the captives home in peace. He said the people of Israel do not forget, even for a moment, the beacons of light held captive in Gaza.
Dozens of European lawmakers have signed a resolution condemning Iranian state-sponsored terrorism. The parliamentarians, all chairs of the Israel Allies caucuses in their respective nations, stressed that Tehran must be held accountable for the October 7th massacre perpetrated by Hamas, a proxy army of Iran. Josh Reinstein, the president of the Israel Allies Foundation, praised the resolution signed by the members of 15 European governments. He said Iran's support of terrorist activities must be stopped at all cost, or the safety and security of innocent civilians is at risk. He added that Iran's terror proxies operate not only in Gaza, but across the Middle East, with a shocking show of support from radical Islamic groups in countries around the globe. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Avi Meir. He's the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Avi, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Avi, we're seeing a lot of media bias come out even these gruesome images of Israel and what happened, this terrible genocide. How is it possible that the media just won't cover it properly?
You know, it's remarkable. We're obviously not new to the phenomenon of media bias against Israel. It's something we encounter quite a lot. But it feels like this time it's in overdrive. Yes, Israel had initial sympathy, right, when 1,400 people were massacred in their homes on Saturday, October the 7th. But so quickly, the media went back to its traditional narrative of Israel being the aggressor. The moment Israel does what it feels it needs to do to respond, immediately Israel became the bad guy. And we saw that immediately. I think it was perhaps most notable in the incident that happened at that Gaza hospital where initial reports, which were of course based entirely on Hamas sources, were that Israel had carried out an airstrike. Israel immediately said that that simply wasn't true, and afterwards presented evidence that in fact it was an Islamic Jihad missile that had fallen short. But by that point, the narrative had already been set, and we're still hearing these lies being regurgitated till this day. And so we'll probably see much more of that, but that's just the life we have.
We have babies being beheaded, Holocaust survivors taken without their medication, slaughter of whole families, yet the BBC won't refer to Hamas as a terrorist organization. It's not just, the lies that are coming out. It's really something shocking. How is this allowed to stand?
It isn't, and it shouldn't be. I think it's remarkable that the British Foreign Secretary cleverly actually spoke out on the BBC and said, these are terrorists, and you should call them terrorists. And I think that, what we're seeing now is an inflection point. This is a moment where you either are on the side of morality or you're on the side of evil. And media organizations need to make that decision as well. They are terrorists. We are very clear about that. The Jerusalem Post, anytime we get a wire story that says militant, we cross that out and put in terrorist instead. And I think the world needs to be doing the same. If you have, as you said, people who behead babies, burn families alive in their homes, there's no other word than terrorist. You could add perhaps other adjectives as well, but they're certainly not militants. They're not freedom fighters, God forbid. And I think we need to start saying so.
We're seeing this also not just in the media, but on the university campuses. Harvard University and some of the Ivy League schools are threatening Jewish students, are chanting in support of the Hamas terrorist organization. How is this allowed to happen in a place that's becomes so woke, where even if you say someone's name wrong or you call someone a name, you can be expelled? How can they do this to Jews?
Well, whether they can or they can't, they do. And the question is, what should we do in response, right? If these are campuses, environments in which Jews feel increasingly unsafe, Jewish students feel like they simply don't have a voice or in fact feel intimidated, I think it's time for the Jewish community and for Israel's and the Jewish community's allies around the world to speak out. And we start to see that. There have been donors who've spoken out about their campuses, who've said they're going to withdraw their donations or stop giving, including Jewish and Christian donors. And I think we need to see more of that. The university administrations have to start feeling the pressure that they simply won't receive support from people who feel that their children won't be safe on campus. And that's something we need to be hearing more of.
Yeah, we're seeing also this incredible anti-Semitism from elements in the Democrat Party. The Squad, as they call it, is pushing the lie that you just talked about the hospital bombing. They're supporting Hamas. They're flying flags of the PA at their offices. Why don't you think there's a bigger crackdown on that?
Well, I think that we are seeing some pushback. There have been quite a few members of Congress who have spoken out against their colleagues who have engaged in those kinds of activities, but they know that they have an audience. They know that the people that you spoke about in the media and on campuses and other environments lap that stuff up. They love it. And so it falls to us to be on the side of morality, the side of justice, and the side of democracy and say, this is not what we stand for. We stand for those who are on the right side of history and not those who support those who murder babies. And I think that the more we have that conversation, the more we engage in this information, I think the stronger that voice will be.
We're seeing a lot of photos in Europe and in the United States of America of people supporting the genocide of Hamas. Yet we know that we have the majority with us. 71% of Americans are standing with Israel against Hamas. Only 18%, according to the last poll that I saw, are standing with Hamas. What can people do to get more involved and get off the sidelines?
Well, first of all, you have to be informed. right? You have to know what's actually going on the ground. Of course, I would encourage you to do so at the Jerusalem Post website, jpost.com. But the minute you feel that you have that empowerment, you have that information, you have to engage in the conversation. It's very easy, as you said, to sit on the sidelines and say, there's not much that I can do. But actually, your voice really does matter. And it's something that I see all the time. I have, over the past few weeks, as this carnage has been going on and sort of seeping into people's consciousness, I've had friends around the world who have nothing to do with Israel and who I'm in many cases not even really in touch with, speaking out, reaching out, asking how I'm doing. That makes a world of difference. And the more that those who haven't made up their minds, who don't know where they stand on this, see that, their minds actually can be shifted as well. It's really important.
Christian support for Israel is paramount. We see it even at the Jerusalem Post that a lot of your readers are Christians. How important is this incredible Christian support that we're seeing around the world?
It's absolutely vital. I don't think Israel would be where it is today without Christian support. I think Christians are amongst Israel's best friends around the world. And I think that that's something that we as Israelis, as Jews, are tremendously grateful for and would like to see continue. And to the extent that we can be partners in ensuring that support continues, of course, we're happy to do that.
Avi, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
At the end of the day, the most important thing is to be informed. Of course, we would love if you did that at the Jerusalem Post, jpost.com. But whatever news source you feel is right for you, make sure that you are staying informed, connected to what happens in the Holy Land. We love your support. We feel your support. We feel your love. Thank you for being there with us, and make sure that you're speaking out as well.
Thank you, Avi, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the truth from Zion.
Persia. You know it as an ancient and historic nation, one of the oldest in the world. But today it is called the Islamic Republic of Iran. In 1979, the name was changed, and with it, their culture as well. Freedom of religion is virtually non-existent in the Islamic Republic. Today, 90% of Iranians practice the Shiite branch of Islam, while other religious groups are living in fear. Islam was not the primary religion for Persians until the 7th century of the Common Era, when the Muslim conquest dominated many places and peoples. The takeover began in the year 632, following the death of their prophet Muhammad in what is today Saudi Arabia. After his death, his followers worked to establish a caliphate, the political religious state comprising the Muslim community and the lands and peoples under its dominion. Islam was a fairly new religion at the time. Judaism predates it and is the oldest of the Abrahamic religions, beginning some 3,320 years ago in the year 1800 before the Common Era. Christianity came afterwards, emerging in the 1st century CE. As Islam grew, it swept across nations from Spain to India, including countries in North Africa. Iran's constitution considers only Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism to be legitimate religions that can be practiced openly. Despite this protection, in recent years, Iran has routinely persecuted those who do not practice the Shiite stream of Islam.
Iran is not simply a fundamentalist Muslim state. It's a fundamentalist state which is absolutely intolerant to any other views, to any other religion, to any other type of Muslim religion.
The fastest growing religion in Iran today is Christianity. The Christian community faces discrimination, and they report that their places of worship are being closed down as congregants face outright harassment. Converts from Islam to Christianity frequently suffer intense pressure to recant their new faith. But the abuse does not stop there. Iranian Christians often experience random arrest and detention before ultimately being forced into rigged trials, which result in lengthy prison sentences. Despite these challenges, many Iranian Christians continue to practice their beliefs in secret, clinging to their faith even in this challenging environment. United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken slammed the Iranian government after the U.S. State Department released its 2022 report on religious freedoms in Iran. Iran's government uses religion to deny women their individual freedoms and shows a great leniency to men who have carried out so-called honor killings, when a man murders a female family member who they claim has acted immodestly. Iran's current constitution states that all citizens shall enjoy human, political, economic, and other rights in conformity with Islamic criteria. If it does not conform, a person could be legally punished with amputation, flogging, and stoning. In 2021, Iran's parliament went so far as to amend the penal code to criminalize insulting Islamic schools of thought. Shortly after that rule went into effect, 3 men were brought to trial after converting to Christianity. When they arrived in court, their lawyers were forbidden from representing them. The judge forced the defendants to advocate for themselves. Eventually, the men were released on bail. Some 17 Christian congregants from their church were also harassed at this time. Iran's 2021 amendment permits a judge to sentence these so-called deviants to imprisonment, a loss of voting rights for 15 years, and hefty fines. In 2022 alone, Iran carried out at least 576 executions. A human rights group found that the government cracked down on religious minorities by arresting 140 individuals, imprisoning 39 of them, issuing travel bans on 51, raiding homes of 94, and bringing 11 to trial simply for their religious beliefs. Government officials, and especially the country's supreme leader, regularly disseminate anti-Semitic rhetoric and deny the Holocaust, spreading hate to citizens of the country with false information and inflammatory messages. The Islamic Republic of Iran has become a brutal theocracy that does not allow the right to freedom of religion. And now, shining light from Israel.
Located on the southern end of the Dead Sea is the ancient ruins of the desert fortress, Masada. Masada, a desert fortress built on the edge of the Judean desert, was originally constructed by the Hashmoneans, the heroes of the story of Hanukkah. However, the ruins that we see here today that we'll be walking through were built by King Herod, not just as a desert fortress, but also a palace in which he could hide out during times of trouble. King Herod ruled the land of Israel from roughly the year 36 BCE until 4 BCE. During that time, he will build massive edifices throughout the land of Israel, including the temple and western wall in Jerusalem. However, he was not a very good king. In fact, he was a terrible human being who killed thousands of innocent people. And therefore, he was terrified that people would want to usurp his throne. And so here at Masada, he's going to build himself not just one palace, but 3 hanging palaces off the northern part of Masada, and another one on the western side. He'll build for himself storehouses filled with dried meats and fish and fruit. Over here you can see unexcavated storehouses. We have no idea what treasures lie beneath these stones. However, Israel has left them unexcavated, so future generations will know what it feels like to unearth treasures from 2,000 years ago. King Herod may have been the king of the Jews, but he was made as such by the Romans. Therefore, he had this unquenchable appetite to prove how Roman he was. He will build Caesarea, a pagan port city along the coast of the Mediterranean. And here at Masada, he's going to build a quintessential Roman bathhouse, designed to the highest degree of Roman interior fashion, lined with frescoes painted on the wall, benches, tiled floors. He'll have a tepidarium, a frigidarium, and of course, the coldarium. Let's go there now. The coldarium, coming from the word cauldron, was the most important room in the entire bathhouse. This is where the body would be cleansed. The way it worked is just over here you would have a hypocaust where infernos would be burning, driving in hot air underneath the floor, but being pumped in by clay pipes that would surround the wall. Once inside, temperatures could reach as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. People would lather your body with essential oils, leaving you feeling clean, crisp, and refreshed. However, Masada's not famous because of King Herod. It lays its claim to fame because this is where the last stand against the Romans took place during the Great Revolt. The year was 70 CE. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. The rebel forces that remained had a decision: either surrender and go to Yavne or come here to Masada. 972 Jews decided on the latter. However, Rome would not allow them to survive up here, and instead they built a circumvention wall and laid siege to Masada. Down below you can see the largest of the military encampments. They built a ramp to bring their battering rams to the top. They battered in the wall, but rather than allowing the Romans the pleasure to murder all of the Jews that were up here atop of Masada, they made the decision to commit suicide instead. In addition to the archaeological excavations at the top of Masada that can be accessed either by hiking or taking the cable car, there's also a museum at the bottom that boasts many of the relics that have been discovered here. Thanks for joining us today, and on your next visit to Israel, you can't miss the desert fortress of Masada.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.